Eccoci, buonasera a tutti, sia
Here
a
we
voi
are. Good
presenti in
evening,
sala e
everyone, both
soprattutto
you who are here
numerosi
present
a quelli che ci
live
seguono,
and also
diciamo,
more numerous those who are
online.
following us
Oggi noi
online.
parliamo di
Today we are
Proteo,
going to talk
che è una
about
vettura
Proteo.
straordinaria. Si
Proteo is
inserisce
an
nel programma di quest'anno
extraordinary
perché
car. It falls into this
celebriamo
year's
tutti gli
program
anniversari
because
con
we are
due
celebrating
e
all
questa
the
vettura,
anniversaries
anche
ending
se non
with
si
one.
direbbe, è stata
And this
presentata nel
car, even though you would not
1991
tell
a
it, was
Ginevra
presented in
e
1991 in
rappresenta
Geneva.
ancora oggi
And it
un
represents
concept
still
da sogno,
today
ma
a
soprattutto
dream
l'esempio
concept,
di
but
un vero e
most of all
proprio
the
laboratorio
example
su ruote,
of a
che
real
ha avuto
laboratory
una
on
sua
wheels,
storia, che avrebbe potuto
which had a
averne anche
specific
una
history
diversa, più lunga,
and could have
ma di
had
cui
another
oggi,
longer
insomma,
different history. But
raccontiamo
today we
dall'inizio.
are going to
E
tell you its
molto
story
in anticipo
from the
sui
beginning.
tempi per quel Salone
It
di Ginevra del
anticipated the times,
1991
and for the
era stato anche
exhibition
realizzato un
of
video di
Geneva,
computer grafica. È
a
chiaro, non è
computer
quella di
graphics
oggi,
video
ma
was
già
realized. Of course, the
si
techniques
vedeva
were not
anche nel
the
modo di
ones that we have
comunicare
today,
una
but also in the way of
lungimiranza dell'Alfa Romeo.
communicating, you could perceive the farsightedness of Alfa Romeo.
E tornando a quel Salone di Ginevra
And
nel
coming
marzo
back
del
to the
1991,
Geneva show in
tanto
March
veniva presentata la
1991,
33
that
Permanente
year
4,
also the
venivano
33
presentate le
Permanent
nuove
4
versioni
was
della
presented, the new
164,
versions of
ma
164
la
were presented,
regina dello stand era
but the
chiaramente
queen
la
of the
Proteo,
stand was of course the
che
Proteo,
era chiamata 164
which was
Proteo e
called
si profilava già
164
come il
Proteo,
coupé
so
della
it already
164
declared to be a
nei
coupe of the
stampa interna era
164.
stata chiamata
In the internal documents,
164
it was
Coupé,
just called
anche quasi
164
a voler
Coupe,
ribadire che si trattava di
almost
un
to
prodotto
reinstate that this
realistico, un prodotto che
was a
avrebbe potuto
realistic
anche avere una
product,
vita.
a product that could have had a
Ma
real life.
tutta questa comunicazione prosegue per
But
molto
all this
tempo. Questo
communication
è
goes on for a
l'articolo
long
sul
time, and this is the
quadrifoglio
article appeared on
dell'estate del
Il Quadrifoglio
1991,
in summer
che spiega
1991,
prima di tutto l'origine del nome.
describing the origin
Proteo
of the
è
name.
il
First of all,
dio
Proteo
greco che è capace di
is the
variare la
Greek
propria
god
forma a
able
piacimento,
to
quindi
change its
trasformarsi.
shape
Ma
and transform
l'accento
itself. But the
sul
accent
Proteo voleva anche
on the name
essere l'acronimo
Proteo
di prototipo Alfa Romeo,
wanted also to stand
un
for a
prototipo di evoluzione Alfa
prototype
Romeo.
Alfa
Insomma,
Romeo.
si
So they tried to represent, starting from the name, one of the characteristics, not the only one, but one of the most visible characteristics, that is the capacity of transforming from coupe to spider, or better, as was written on the press launch, to go beyond the simple definition, offering to be a hybrid because they wanted to offer the comfort and some advantages of a closed car with a canvas, a roof, for example, but also the possibility of driving a real spider in the open air. But they also needed to talk about a prototype, that is a car that launched a series of innovations that partly would be seen on the cars of the following years and partly would have been remained stuck in the drawers. And talking about drawers, the Proteo is presented in 1991, but it is not the only project of a coupe which was developed in those years, since one of the most interesting and ambitious projects revolved around the 10 cylinders AW engine, which in its race version was presented in a 164 Pro car, the only one which then was presented, but also on the Gruppo C, SEZ 048SP, and also the Formula 1 Ligier, probably. But at the same time, a 10 cylinders was developed, 4 liters and less powerful, which should have been mounted on a coupe developed by Alfa Romeo, whose drafts are existing, showing it in a similar shape of the Proteo. It's a very compact car with a big hood, and many things were conceived. Also the launching and selling strategy in collaboration with the Maserati dealers abroad especially, as well as the performances, the prices, all these were estimated. But then the company of the world took another direction. The coupe would not be developed into a single complete prototype, and for some time no one talked about this. But the idea of a high-performing coupe, very sports car and very Alfa Romeo, continues until it was presented in 1991, as I said, and that was the Proteo. Press photographs were taken showing that the car was real, complete in all its details, and also a press release was published as for all the other cars, same graphics, same setting, and that was something rare because generally for the prototypes, the technical charts, the schemes, the blueprints with the sizes were not made. So the car was presented since the beginning as if it really was the first step of a longer project. But as always, in order to talk about the project, we do not only want to lean on the archives documents of the Alfa Romeo Center, but also on the protagonists of the time. So today we have invited here Ciro Palestra, who will give his speech from remote, and Gottardo Bustreo, who was the head of that project. Am I right? Well, let's say that at the time I was technical director of Stola, and Alfa Romeo before commissioned the transformation of the model in a master model with development of surfaces. You see, that is the picture of Bustreo and Palestra, who was my collaborator for the development of the chassis. From the master model, which was developed with the surfaces on the computer, it was approved both by Alfa Romeo and by Fiat in order for us to continue and create a car that at the time was still a concept car. Concept meant that it was a car having some pillars, the bodywork that could be transformed, so Spider, Coupe, and from Coupe to Spider, the bodywork entirely developed in carbon, aeronautic carbon, the roof in glass that was transparent, but with sun, the roof had an internal liquid and it became dark. So having the sun while driving, it's not nice in order to drive. And then the mechanical part, which was the 10 cylinders mentioned before, and a four-wheel drive transmission and a steering back part. So for Stola, at the moment, it was a complex project that had to be developed. And it was actually developed to this point. So we have the drawings of the chassis showing that the chassis had to withstand the spider part. So for a coupe, which has a complete structure on the upper part and lower part of the car, it has less needs of being sturdy. So at that point, one of my collaborators, Ciro Balestra, comes in. He was an expert of development of spider cars, and he developed a chassis which had incredible performances at the bench test for torsion stiffness, and it also showed this on the track with the tests done with the prototype. Well, the style starts to take life at the design center of Alfa Romeo. Yes, I just interrupt you. That department was still at the Portello in Milan at the end of 1989, before it was moved to Arese. Yes, it was the last year. At the time, De Silva would have become what we already know, but at the time was just a young head of design pushing a lot on the technologies. Proteo was communicated in Geneva as the first car completely conceived in computer design, so digitally, with modern systems. Probably some did that already in the past or partly, but that was the christening, I would say. But Proteo was a lab car, especially beneath its skin. So we talk about the stiff, rigid top in glass, retractable. But Proteo also launched some innovations that would go in production: W6 24 valves, in that case 260 horsepower, with jets of oil for cooling the pistons. It had a harder, I would say, setting, but it was the first time something like that was visible, and that would have equipped the 164 and then a genealogy of later cars. But Proteo also launched other systems, the Q4 transmission, that is, the transmission that would later take on the name of Q4, that here was just called Viscomatic. It was a gear with viscose joint that could distribute the load in an automated way with a Ferguson device, which was developed in collaboration with Steyr. It was tested in those years on several cars, and it was launched with that configuration on the Proteo, which could distribute the torque, putting 60% on the front gear if you lose the grip of the back part. So that was a great innovation. Another innovation was the active suspensions, the suspensions with adjustable damping. In the case of Proteo, there were two positions, two settings available. But these are solutions that would enter both in the production, because both active amortizers and Q4 transmission became a reality. But what was definitely ambitious, but then in Alfa Romeo would never go in production, was the system of integral steer. So you see it in the scheme. So mechanically, a second box was fed that could steer the back wheels 5 degrees in two ways: high speed to improve the stability of the car. So the wheels were steered in the same direction, while to maneuver, to make it more easy, they were steered in the opposite direction, allowing the car almost to have an entire turn or make a pirouette. All this in a single car, but not only, it already showed a great technical expertise to be shown to the world. But let's not forget that also style was interesting, and style was developed by Bertelli at the design center of Alfa Romeo mainly. And we can see here that the man is working not on one of the final drafts, but on the drafts that were published during the presentation to accompany the press release, so telling the evolution of the line of Proteo. Actually, the beginning starts with disappearing headlamps with a very low front, and then it takes on the final form with 3 optical brooms in the front and a very high tail. So a series of models are developed. You can see some here, and you see exactly the one that is in the hands of Bertelli and Mario Favilla. But of course, you see also some more technical schemes, starting to set the size, the shapes of the bodywork, and the size and the shape of the internal parts. But at a certain point, apart from designing the car, you also have to build the car. One of the strong points was the capacity of changing the shape. Yes, going from a coupe to a Spider meant cancelling all the other elements, but Spider having a rigid roof. So before, all the tops were put in the back part, folded in the back part, but it was not a complete disappearing. It was a Spider with a mobile top. The huge innovation here was finding a mechanism that could make all the stiff parts disappear, hoof and rear window, all in the trunk. So after a few studies, we were able to complete the research, and after a first prototype in the garage, we saw that it was working. At the end of this, we completed the job with a series of hydraulic elements that could automatize and have the coupe part disappear, the roof and the rear window, in the trunk. So it was an evolution that, I would say, changed from the side of Fiat the wheel of continuing from concept to running prototype. So when Fiat realized that the car could reach what concept meant presenting with drawings, but not mechanically working. So it was just an idea. While here they were able to transform this concept in a practical part, so they were convinced to say this is no longer a concept, this is a prototype, running prototype, because it worked, and there was the idea also to launch it and start the production. Yes, there are some notes taken on the draft of the press release, underlining that how, unlike 164, the H point was lowered to increase the distance from the roof, which was transparent, but a lot of care was also given to the Solextra patent in collaboration with the Research Center and PPG Industries that allowed to eliminate up to 60% of UV rays and to be photochromatic, so you could go from an almost complete, at least in the top part, darkness to light, maintaining a light of transparency according to the norms, complying with the law. So the approach was a very realistic one. But this system already worked on the first prototype. Yes, it's working. This is the first prototype which was made, and it is working. Tests had been carried out at the CRF, and we were able to obtain this prototype with all the characteristics defined in the project. So we talked shortly about the ideas and the reasons, but let's get to the point where you really start to build this prototype, which, well, Stola is charged of transforming the idea in a real car. And we have a series of images. These few images, very neat, were taken at the design center Alfa Romeo, not at Stola's, with the idea of creating press reviews, but Gottardo brought us real pictures of from the backstage. Let's say that on the second picture to the left, you see the construction of the chassis, that we tried on the bench for the torsion tests. At the top, the construction of the first prototype with all the carbon elements, and then the installation, together with Fiat technicians, of the engine and the transmission. On the picture bottom right, you see the first design model done at Stola's, transforming a 1:4 scale model in a 1:1 scale model that we will see in a later picture. It went through the wind tunnel for the aerodynamic improvements, but I recognize a very young Walter de Silva, after present in the works of this masterpiece. Who are the others? Well, Alfredo Stola is at the bottom, one of the owners of the company, De Silva, Bertelli, and then the workers responsible for the engine, transmission, etc. On the press release, you read 18 months to transform the idea from model to running model. That was the timeline. Yes, those models are very short models. You see under the milling machine there's a model that was March, April 1999. 89, yes, correct, 89. So the order was then delivered to Stola August, September, and in February, March, we were in Geneva in 1991 with the prototype completed. So always running, but well done. So seeing the rapidity with which we built this model, we also were given by Fiat the realization of another Spider, which had an incredible success, which was the Barchetta. So we were lucky enough to reach the goal in building this prototype. Well, De Silva bet a lot of his career on the Proteo and the same technical direction, etc. Well, De Silva as a designer, but also Jacoponi, who was a technical director, who took charge of saying to Fiat, yes, we will present this prototype to the Geneva exhibition. That was a risk. It was a risk that helped him to become the director, technical director of Fiat later on. And when the concept was presented in Geneva, well, it was perfect, running, but it also had some innovations in terms of materials, which honestly on a project rapidly developed were not needed, like the carbon fiber hoods, materials in plastics, and some surfaces were in material which was soft to the touch, but they could be painted, and that material then was over the years liquefied, it melted. But that's okay on a prototype. It happened also on the series sold. We use materials that used also on other cars that were then sold, were not successful. That soft touch, it then had an evolution, but it melted. The model was left under the sun for a long time, and also in the museum, so we enclosed, and that's why the problems arise. And also the internal had some innovations. There were no vents for the aircon, but perforations. The seats were electrically adjusted, and some of the solutions would have been seen later on with the years. But at a certain point, you bring the car to the wind tunnel, where? In Orbassano? Yes. Well, the car, in order to improve its characteristics for the street use, was brought to the wind tunnel of the Orbassano Fiat Research Center, where it was fine-tuned in order to give an efficient characteristic to the model and to the car. Until finally the car is complete and goes and hits the road. It is brought to Balocco. There was a photo shooting that day, and we have that in the archives, but tests were performed before that picture, or that was the only occasion? No, we went out of Stola with this car, we went to Balocco, and Moroni, who was the test driver of Alfa Romeo, tested it for 2-3 hours, an entire day, with good results. You see that the car is but coupe in certain pictures and Spider in others. So it was tested in the two versions. And once the car was delivered, the official pictures taken, the tests in Balocco done and presented in Geneva, what happens? The project is continued? No. Stola received the order for 3 cars to continue the tests, because the tests for the car were crash tests, so there were several important tests. Afterwards, they started to build the chassis and some parts in carbon fiber, but then Fiat, seeing the experience of another car, which was not very successful, decided not to continue in developing this car. But the part I regret more is not patenting the device that makes the top completely disappear. So, not having patented the mechanical part, the competing, like BMW and Mercedes, the competing dealers, after 2 years, launched models, I would say competitors of Proteo. I imagine that the experience you are talking about was the SZRZ. The 1000 vehicles never reached as a goal, but the body and chassis derived from the 164, yes, from the 164, and it was shortened. It was shortened because it was shortened and reinforced for the parts which have to be a greater stiffness in structure for a Spider. So it was adjusted having in mind another limited series, or you wanted to launch a 164 coupe in series. When we launched, we started and they said, okay, the car is okay, it's approved, everything works, and there's a picture where all the managers of Fiat went to the Geneva show to admire this prototype, because you should only admire this car. Thoughts were around 1,000 cars. So, but then the period of the limited series was declining. Alfa Romeo suffered one of the hardest consequences of this. So the idea was abandoned, and the project also. But you said that there was a future. Well, yes, in Stola, they didn't want to abandon the project. So we did an electric car for kids. So you see the daughter of Stola playing with that car. This is the Proteo done as an electric car. Well, everybody was proud of that project in the end. Yes. Well, thank you. I would conclude this part, but I'm sure that there are questions from our audience. There are also many online. So we can start with a question, because we have Gottardo Bustreo, who, apart from being at the time the technical head of the project for Stola, also had a career in Alfa Romeo. Am I correct? Yes, I left Alfa Romeo to go first to another big company, which was General Electric, and then Stola offered me the direction and development of design and planning. So I went to Stola, and we were lucky enough, I think. Well, I thank you for what you brought and showed us. Thanks a lot. And now we have Ciro Palestra connected from remote, and Ciro Palestra, after working in Alfa Romeo, worked as an external consultant at the Proteo. So he will tell us something about the development of Proteo starting from the 164 chassis. But I was working at Samen Trattori in 1989. I had the pleasure of receiving a visit from Gottardo Bustreo, who's a friend of the 10 years that I spent in Alfa Romeo. So he told me, well, Ciro, I need your collaboration to develop a design office in Pero to support the Alfa Romeo Design Center. So the pleasure of working together, the enthusiasm of working for Alfa Romeo, which left in me an incredible memory, but pushed me to say, okay, I leave everything and I come. So the design office grows. We are 10 people. At the same time, a collaboration with the design center starts with a great head of the center, which is the Silva, which for me is the light of the renewal of the Alfa Romeo style. And there I found Bertelli, who was modeling this model of Proteo. And we started. Of course, the design was on the drafting machines, because in those years the 3D computer at industrial level was just at the beginning, so I had a couple of people on the computer and 8 on the drafting machine, and from there we started to collaborate. Bustreo was a great expert of that car. He gave me all the external measurements, volumes, etc. And starting from there, we had the chassis of 164 dressed with this new bodywork. And I must say that my previous experience in Zagato was fundamental, because in 1993, arriving at Zagato, I had the opportunity to follow both in the design with many difficulties and also in the production the transformation of the Biturbo Maserati in Biturbo Spider. I still remember all the headaches to have the adequate stiffness, which was 2/3, and it was imposed on us. And that experience then, applied to the Proteo, gave us the possibility to realize a nice car. So I had some experience. As I said, the design was done on the drafting machines. Stola had a first-grade model department, and my role was to follow the design and the growth of this car and bringing the drafts to Turin to Stola. Stola, with the model department and its employees, etc., realized the running model of this car. I'd like to add that this car had a glass top. So, in a car, in a trip, there were me, Bustreo, De Silva, Bertelli, and the head of the project Alfa Romeo, and the technical from the Fiat Research Center. So there was a trip. We went to Pittsburgh, to the PPG in Pittsburgh, because in the beginning we wanted to realize this top in a single piece as a half egg, and then realize the pieces with water cut, but that was not realized because the costs to have this innovation were huge, excessive. But Proteo was a complete innovation, from mechanics to bodywork, and to me it was a great experience and a great satisfaction, also a great pleasure. This 164 chassis with a different engine was then equipped with the external parts, with the structures of the model. So there was a growth There were longer ones with 3 sheets, very thick, with diaphragms internally, a tube to maintain the stiffness of the windshield. So there were many, many details. And then, for example, the hood of the engine that could not be printed in sheet steel was done in carbon. So again, the first experiences of composite materials. And then also the internal part, even though I was not responsible of the internal part, because Bustreo directly followed them with the planning in Turing, but we were continuously in contact with the designers to industrialize their ideas of application of style. I should say that our fundamental role is to translate the design ideas in elements that could be faithfully reproduced and launched in the series, but that was not happening in the past. If you think about the past, the car set the style, the planning then adjusted the style, and then there was the production which adjusted the design. And since the possibility of working with the mathematic models, 3D models, was not possible, well, this no longer happened, because already with the design you could have such a collaboration with the design and style that was very advanced. I know very well some of you. We have experts on 164, fans of Spider 164 GTB. Yes, I know you have questions. I bring you the microphone. I know that there are two 166 with Q4 technology. So I know that there are two 166 Alfa Romeo with a Q4 technology. So the Proteo technology and Q4 was continued on the car, continued what you showed here, or you changed completely the technology on those prototypes you have? Well, in the museum we have a prototype of 166, but it has a frontal drive, not Q4. That car will have a series of Q4 with another project, but the starting base was the Q4 launched with Proteo. A new generation would arrive with the 159, having a different scheme. So the 160s, you don't have them? Or they were just produced and destroyed, or something exists? They're not in the collection of the museum, so just experiments done on cars, but they're not. So it was not a continuation of the project. No. Thank you. Can you give the microphone to your... Thank you. Well, I'm from Holland and I don't speak Italian a lot, so maybe I will not be clear. So, I come from the design world. In '94, I graduated. So to me, the concept of GTV Spider, I think I saw it in '91 in Amsterdam during an exhibition. So those cars were an inspiration for my profession, and I bought one now. But I'm interested in the process of design, meaning that we have a nice Proteo car here, and we have GTW and Spider. So something is not clear to me. So these were developed by different departments of Alfa Romeo. No. the style of Alfa Romeo is one, and in that design office, Alberto Bertelli was in charge of developing the model. He developed a mock-up when De Silva thought that the model had enough details and characteristics to be transformed in the master model, in a one-to-one model. The Stola external company was outsourced to prepare the one-to-one model. So, from the model to the milling part of the one-to-one model, you must have preparatory designs where you go and see whether the engine is in the right position, the size and height are correct. So after doing the checks, the legal checks, then you mill the model, and then you've seen the model finished that could be presented at the direction that once having seen the one-to-one model, the one you saw in the wind tunnel, decided to continue. So we were charged no longer to develop only the master model, but also to develop the concept of the Proteo. With the characteristics, we said, yes, that is clear. Maybe I was not clear. I thought there was a specific process for Proteo, but in parallel, there was also development of GTW Spider. Well, there was not De Silva. De Silva is not here. He's the only one who could say that in that period the characteristic was this kind of front part, and once it is characterized, it will remain. Well, that's my idea. It remains for a certain period of time. We see it on some cars. Once you have a successful front or a characteristic part, which is liked by the public and developed over time, you develop several models having as a principle that characteristic. So I don't know in the design department whether this thought was done. I think yes. So it's not Bertelli who developed the Spider. Bertelli was with us for 2 years to bring about all the retouches needed for the external parts of this model. For the internal parts, you've seen before Favilla, together with Bertelli, another designer, who was responsible with the internal part. As I said before, the two projects coexist for a period, at least from documents we have. Well, for a long time, the origins are very close, but the two paths that they take are very different. While Proteo starts from the platform of 164, and then is given to be developed to a team, and then for the building of the prototype, they go to Stola. The project of the GTV Spider is developed in collaboration with Pininfarina. Enrico Fumia worked on that, Pininfarina worked on that, and it is then developed in a very close collaboration with Alfa Romeo also, because these cars, at least in the beginning, were built in Alfa Romeo. So it was not completely outsourced to Pininfarina. But it is undeniable that from the stylistic point of view, there was a dialogue, even though these two started from very different platforms, because GTV Spider started from the Type 2, smaller, with no four-wheel drive, with different characteristics, but some elements remained, and some are visible, like the idea of having a very low front, very high back, the round headlamps, but also in a certain sense, the development shows that it was a dialogue, because both on Proteo and on the 916, the hood is realized in a monolithic element. The headlamps are mounted on the chassis, and in a hood you just have the holes. The hood itself is realized not in sheet steel, but Proteo carbon and the GTB Spider in resin. Because we know that also today the mass production of carbon fiber is not a simple process. And then all around the car there are, I would say, details that dialogue with one another, but as Postreo was saying, it was also a quite definite, like precise style, because the back was present on the Proteo 164 and also on the 75, kind of, and on GTB Spider. So all the projects were developed in a single department, the style or design department, which shared an approach, a stylistic language. Thank you. A couple of things. Well, in my archive, I have copies of documents coming from the Portello design department. These were notes done by Fiat, the quality department, concerning the 916, the opening push button, and that could be done in a better way, and I think it was 88. Talk about the contamination of style. You can see on the projects of 164 what was done internally and that was abandoned in favor of the Pininfarina one. Well, the one done in-house, but there is something from the project of Fumier and Pininfarina, or in those projects. And here I see characteristics that make me smile every time. Maybe one day we'll talk about that, which are the arrows that I've seen on RZ Speedster that I know nothing about. I have the pictures at the end of the 90s and 2000. I saw outside the design center when there was the Alex Ricambi part. But this red, in the end, the color is the thing that in Alfa Romeo at least remained in the color palette, the Proteo red. So the choice of the color was done since the beginning. That's a very specific color, so the choice was suggested or imposed directly by Bertelli and his team. It was suggested, and we found, well, the composition. It was presented, they liked it, so we continued with that line. It was an idea of the design department, the color. Then you know that in the color combinations, you do not always hit the target. You maybe not produce the right color immediately, but that was a luck. Well, the rest of the questions will arrive later on from remote, and we will answer them in a second moment. So thank you for participating here, and thanks for participating from your PC, but especially thanks to Ciro Palestro and Gottardo Bustreo, who shared some anecdotes with us about the project of the Proteo, which not only represented a milestone from the point of view of style, technique, product, but as of today, after many years, still is a concept full of charm. Thanks again, and have a great rest of the day.